Hello and welcome to a Beef PC vlog video. Looking at some of our past videos, it seems like our 2500K has been really popular, and for good reason. The 2500K is an excellent budget CPU choice that's cheap and powerful. Today, let's make a less formal video on choosing a motherboard and overclocking this chip, hopefully to 5 GHz. Let's go! First thing we need to do, of course, is choose the motherboard. It's the most important part of overclocking. We have here a fairly budget choice, the Gigabyte Z68APD3. It's representative of a low to mid-range series Z board, so it's probably a more affordable choice for proper overclocking, and the results can only be better if you have a better board. We had an Asus P8Z77V, but that for one broke. Only one memory stick worked, and also its price is a bit out of reach for any budget builder. The part that the motherboard affects overclocking the most is the power delivery to the CPU, or the VRM. Essentially, the more phases you have and the better they're cooled, the better it is. Let's see how to determine how many phases you have on your motherboard. This will work with all boards. Count the MOSFETs and the chokes that you see on the left side of the CPU socket, might also be on the top. Some phases go to vCore, which we care about, and some go to things like the iGPU or memory controller, which aren't so important. Let's determine which are vCore. For this, you'll need a tool called a multimeter. This is 100% necessary. Now that you've acquired a multimeter, let's start measuring the chokes on the back. These chokes are used for filtering the power from the MOSFETs, the little black chips, and usually one choke means one phase. Let's determine which of these chokes are connected to vCore. All vCore chokes are connected in parallel, so let's measure the resistances from one choke to each other. As you can see, the 4 chokes in the middle here are connected to each other with a resistance of basically 0. The other ones provide a resistance when measured, so they're probably for something else, like the iGPU or the memory controller. Here's a tip: do not use continuity mode. So we've determined that we have 4 phases to vCore, which is what I'd consider the bare minimum for a hefty overclock, for example the 5 GHz. Other features might affect this as well, but this is the easiest way to tell if you don't know about the BIOS, for example, of a motherboard. Now let's prepare the board a bit for the overclock. Let's replace the old and worn thermal pads over the VRM heatsink, and let's keep them cool for this overclock. Perfect, now we're ready to assemble and let's go. The most important thing, or the second most important thing for overclocking, is CPU cooling. We could use our Noctua NHD15S, but that's rather expensive and out of reach for a lot of people. So let's just use this Arctic Freezer 7 Pro with a thermal pad instead. The thermal pad performs just slightly worse than real paste. Alright, let's go into Windows and see if our stuff works. It does, but our temperatures are through the roof. Alright, we gotta change coolers back to the D15S. Okay, we're back. Let's take a look at our final setup. There's a Core i5-2500K, Gigabyte Z68AP-D3 motherboard, Noctua NHD15S cooler, 16GB of DDR3 that will adjust the speeds for later, and RX 560 for display output, Windows on an SSD, and everything connected to an 850 watt power supply. Not necessary, but it's what we had. Here's some more basic information for overclocking. Just creep the voltage up and up and up and the frequency up with it. You'll hit a limit somewhere. It might be your CPU cooling, or it might be a maximum safe voltage. Maximum safe voltage for Sandy Bridge chips like the 2500K should be about 1.45 volts under max load, and idle voltage just keep below 1.55 or something and it should be okay. You could go higher a bit, especially for just a benchmark run, but I think these voltages are perfectly enough for daily use. Also, let's set the memory to the highest it'll go to. On this board it seems to be 2133 MHz. Just as a comparison, let's run Cinebench at all-core 3.7 GHz, which is basically the all-core turbo speed, maybe higher by 0.1 GHz, but whatever. It scored about 500. Now let's get overclocking. Our goal is 5.0 GHz. Let's cue the montage and enjoy watching. Sorry we didn't capture the screen, by the way. Alright, here we are, 5 GHz. It's not Prime 95 stable, but it doesn't blue screen either, and Cinebench runs without a problem. A little more voltage, or ideally a little more LLC, would be really helpful to stabilize this, or even overclock a bit more, but for daily use in my case, I'd keep it around 4.8 GHz. Keep in mind that these voltage and frequency settings are for my chip and for my motherboard, and I have a feeling I have a good sample, but I do have a pretty low-end motherboard. Your mileage may vary wildly. So to conclude, is this worth doing? Should you go out and buy a board, a cooler, and CPU to overclock for the performance? The simple answer is no. To overclock, like we mentioned, you'll need to buy a nice motherboard, a nice cooler, and there's gonna be extra noise and your power bill is going to inflate. You're much better off, for example, buying a Skylake i5. Its IPC is so much that its performance won't be so far off the overclocked older Sandy Bridge chip, and you can use a cheap cooler and a cheap motherboard. Also, these old motherboards I find are just not as reliable as the newer ones. Well, we hope that was informative because it's the end of the video. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please leave a like and please consider subscribing. See you next time.